But let's start with Oklahoma City. They win the championship. What stood out to you about their season? What do you think about when you think about the Thunder season?
You know, what I think about is that the most impressive part about this team to me is their roster construction. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the players or from Shai or any of this. To me, this is not the first team, but it's the most recent team where I felt like the general manager was almost the star. And I don't mean the star as in the front-facing guy. That's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But I mean star as in I say, what is it about this team that makes them impressive? It's that they were incredibly conceived, constructed, and nurtured. You know, the culture that they built and the way they assembled their roster and their assets moving forward is the story. So to me, Sam Presti, this is Sam Presti's championship more than anybody else's. Some people I know will disagree with that. It doesn't take anything away from how great Shai was or how great, you know, any of the players were individually. But that's what will stand out to me is that we're in the era where the general manager feels so important. This new CBA, how you think about the evolution of the game and all those things are so important. And Sam Presti just did an unthinkable job in getting the second youngest champion of all time put together. And, you know, we're pretty dominant, and at least in the regular season. I think they were significantly less dominant in the postseason, which is interesting, but they just were so wonderfully put together that they feel, I know we had the light years Warriors. They were light years ahead of everybody else. I think the Thunder feel light years ahead of everyone in this current environment, in large part because of Sam Presti's brilliance.
And there's definitely some luck involved, right? You kind of fall backwards into this. You know, everything that you were able to get from the Clippers, none of this happens if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander isn't coming over in a Paul George trade. None of this happens if Kawhi basically tells them to do it, right? Like Kawhi Leonard gets a lot of the credit, and this is certainly indirectly. The take of Sam Presti is such a great one, though, because is he the most famous general manager we have in sports right now? Has he surpassed sort of like the Theo Epstein, where it's just like,
in sports,
name a general manager in sports, and it feels like Presti is the number one guy. He has sort of become a star, and he's got the glasses, the suit, super tailored kind of look. Like he's built for TV, right? He's got the hair, he's got it going. Yeah, I think Sam Presti is like the household name in terms of GMs.
It might be. I mean, Daryl Morey had a run there for a while. Sam Hinkie, I think, was as famous as anyone, not necessarily for success, but for, you know, how unique his approach was. You have Pat Riley. I mean, your guy has been pretty, just in terms of decision makers, has been pretty iconic. But at this very moment, Presti does seem like the quintessential NBA general manager of 2025. Meaning every margin matters. The guys that are making trades. You mentioned the Shai trade, and you said a little bit of luck. I don't know that it was luck. You know, I think that was a very shrewd move. Part of being a great GM is always knowing who the most desperate team is in the right moment and then going after them. He did that, getting Shai, who, by the way, I don't think it's that much luck. He was a really good player. I think you could see the upside after his rookie season. So that to me wasn't crazy. And then he just knew that, hey, the Clippers right now need to get Paul George. This is a need, and they're willing to part ways with all this stuff. When he got Alex Caruso, there was a little bit of, okay, that's a team in Chicago. That's the fish at the table, so to speak. They want to get rid of this guy. We'll get rid of somebody who's expendable to us. And then all the assets they collected along the way, they made a dozen little deals that armed them with the capacity to make the big ones. And to me, it's just not luck. It's opportunistic. It's smart. It's forward thinking.
Yeah, and you can look back on what they got for the Shai trade, which has been done a million times during these finals. But what I think gets lost in that a little bit is since the Shai trade, we've had Rudy Gobert go for the 1 million first-round picks, Mikal Bridges 5 first-round picks, Desmond Bane recently 4 first-round picks. It's kind of become pretty common for those big hauls to come in a trade. That was not the case when Paul George got traded. And what Sam Presti did that summer was just keep asking for more, where it felt like a lot of GMs out of like respect or whatever it might be would just stop at a point. And he was like, well, can I also have this? Can I also have this? And he just kept asking for more. And eventually the couple of Clippers were just like, yeah, I guess like we have to get Kawhi. And this is the only thing that is going to enable us to do it. And that was in a weird way, pretty revolutionary at the time to just say, no, we want all of it. We want all of it. We're not going to be nice about this. We don't care what fair is. We want all of it because we kind of have all the leverage in these conversations.
Yeah. And valuing that those picks weren't just about players, right? We're just going to get players, but that those were the assets that were needed. And I think the Clippers probably didn't have enough respect for that when they made that trade. Because if you remember, I mean, nobody will forget where everybody was when those trades went down. Everybody was in summer league, or the NBA media was in summer league for that one.
I was in the lobby of the Cosmopolitan downstairs before I worked my way up to the Chandelier Bar when it happened.
The famous Chandelier Bar, summer league staple. But yeah, so when that happened, people were talking about the Clippers. It was, oh my God, the Clippers just assembled the super team. Not, oh, did they spend too much assets, too many assets? It was the Clippers just pulled off the unthinkable. And to me, the second part of this is Sam Presti built a team very deliberately that was ready for where the league was going. And what it was you look at how the league was evolving with switching and how teams have to score and what do you take away? And he said, we're going to have a roster full of guys who can guard one-on-one on the perimeter. Because if you have that, you kind of throw the ultimate wrench in whatever it is that teams are trying to do. We now have guys who can sit down and guard, so we're going to have a good defense. He didn't just have a good defense. He built an elite defense, one of the best we've ever seen. But he was aiming for, we're just going to have good defenders everywhere on the court. And again, and it wasn't just that. He also built a structure, a small market structure that was, we're going to be a factory of developing this type of player. So whoever we draft, those guys are going to become this. And to me, that's why he was so forward thinking. And it worked out phenomenally because these guys all became, I think, even better than you expected, including Shai. But at least the theory, the blueprint that he was operating under was spot on.
And the surprising part about this is it didn't take that long.
No.
Oklahoma City fans might feel differently because they were living it day to day, but all that stuff, like you said, that happened in 2019. Everybody remembers where they were. It was not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
What a rebuild used to be in the NBA, when you thought about it, it was like, well, are you ready for a decade of misery? That was sort of the narrative around what a rebuild was, and rightly so. But between Oklahoma City, and you can even look at Houston and what they've done since the Harden stuff when they traded him, it's kind of like 5 years if you do it right. Obviously, you can end up not doing it right and end up like Charlotte or whatever. But if you do it right, you can kind of get back into the mix within 5 years. Now, getting in the mix and then winning a championship like the Thunder just did, very different things. But just even the Thunder were in the mix last year, right? Number 1 seed in the Western Conference going to the playoffs, obviously lost in the second round, but they were right back in it. And in terms of the roster construction part, where he was ahead of his time too, and this is where they're very similar to Boston, where Boston was ahead of the time. You've seen, I'm sure, that the weak link theory out there and how we're in the NBA's era of the weak link kind of era now. Well, they don't have many weak links. That was when they traded Giddey for Caruso. That was sort of the end of the weak link part in their roster. They also are a strong link team because Shai has a Shai was the best player in the league this season. So they have both things, and that's obviously incredibly hard to do.
It's incredibly hard. And the fact that they're set up not just for this run, but now you look at them going forward and say, all of their players should be better next year than they were. At a minimum, they should be the same. I mean, is Caruso really going to be better? I don't know, but he's not going to be worse. And then you look at J-Dub. He grew throughout these playoffs. He grew from last year's playoffs to this year. He's on the upswing. Chet Holmgren injured. He's going to get better. And then they have all this versatility behind him. I mean, Topic is a guy that I know a lot of people were really, really excited about. He joins their roster next year, as well as all these draft picks that they have. So they're set up for the future. They're built really smartly. They have this unselfish culture about them that's very impressive and enviable. You always think about when a team wins, one of the biggest obstacles that creeps in is the disease of more. I just don't know that that's going to be a thing that hits them. I mean, it hits everybody to some extent, but I don't know if they're going to be hit as hard as some other teams have been in the past. And so, yes, it's foresight. Sam Presti to me this was a Sam Presti championship, and it was his vision culturally, emotionally, as well as obviously from a talent perspective that to me was just so spot on, and it's hard to do.
The disease of more thing is such a great call. I've made this comparison before. I don't know if I've done it on this show or other places, but this Thunder team reminds me of the Florida Panthers that just won the Stanley Cup, which is obviously close to home for me. And in just how unselfish they are. And there's even similar ways in that they play, but I'll skip all of that. But the Panthers won the Stanley Cup, and what I thought was really cool, what they did was they repeated, right? So they won the Stanley Cup last year and they won it this year. And when they won it this year, the first thing, usually what you do is, you take the Stanley Cup, you go around the ice and you kind of hold it up to your home fans and all this stuff. And it's usually the team captains and the star players, they do it. And that's what they did last year. But this year, the first people who got the Stanley Cup to do their little spin around the ice were the new guys, the guys who weren't on the roster last year. And I thought that was a really cool, unselfish thing to do. And the captains waited until last to go ahead and have that moment that they deserved. And what I really liked when the Thunder won the finals last year during this last night during the ceremony, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets the finals MVP trophy, hands it to Jalen Williams, and makes and tells Jalen Williams, "You hold it up. This is just as much as it is yours." Jalen Williams gives it back, starts to hand it back to SGA, and SGA goes, "No, pass that shit around." And the thing starts going around. And I'm like, I love that. That is such an unselfish thing. Shai is the definition of an unselfish superstar. And it's not just saying it. He really does do it. And you talk to even people behind the scenes and people who cover that team every single day, and they're like, no, this stuff is real, man. Like, this is not just bark. Like, this is bite. This is how he does it. This is how he is. And it is so rare that you come across players like that. You cover one in Jokic, right? I covered one briefly in Golden State in Steph Curry. Like, those guys are so rare. And it's when talent meets that ability to set the culture of a locker room, that stuff's really, really cool. And that's when I think about this Thunder team, I think about that in addition to all the other things that we're talking about here.
Yeah, but the difference, Jokic, as much as he is 100%, as that guy, as much as anybody we've ever seen, it isn't the same, I guess, top to bottom for the Nuggets roster the way that it was for this Thunder team. And for the Thunder, it almost seems like it comes easier for everybody else,
right.
And that's why J-Dub has no, for him, he's like, no, it's you. And so, yeah, man, it's fascinating, to watch it come together. I keep saying this is the first Gen Z champion that we've ever had. It's ahead of schedule because usually the new generation culturally, they don't win till a little bit later in their careers. They're the first team that just feels personality wise like a different generation than the ones that have come before it in some small way. And we'll see how that evolves over time. But so far, it's a little frightening in how much they all seem to be buying into the exact things that made them what they are.
Two more notes on the Thunder before we move on. I said this before, when I think about this Thunder team, it's the best defense I've ever seen. And that's different than saying it's the best defense ever. I don't know about that. Just defenses that I've watched. And the first great defense I remember seeing was the early aughts Detroit Pistons.
Yeah.
But I was, 13, 14, something. I wasn't exactly going through the NBA.com database and being like, where does their defensive rating rank relative to some of the... I wasn't doing that. I just remember Ben Wallace being a monster. This is the best defense that I think I've seen and been able to cover and watch. It's the best defense I've ever seen.
I think it's tough. I'm just to kind of go with you. I think the Pistons comp is kind of interesting because it was a thing where they had great individual defenders, but it was all of them together. The one thing I'll say is I'm a big believer in that the NBA is building on top of itself. And the game in 2025 is more spread out and, in my opinion, more difficult to defend than it was in 2004. That's not a knock on the Pistons. It's evolved to where now there's more space to cover and it requires more cohesion. And so to me, it is more impressive that they're able to do it at the level that they do because of how it requires everyone to be good and to work together. And they just do it so seamlessly every night. They don't have bad defensive nights. There's not nights where you're like, man, they just didn't bring it. They're good defensively every single night.
Right. And when they needed to win these games, what did they do, right? They go into halftime in Game 7 down 1 after that Nembhard three-pointer at the buzzer, and they come out in the third quarter, and they just start generating steals. It's Lou Dort, it's Alex Caruso, it's Kayson Wallace, it's all these guys doing what they did. They went back to what was comfortable. My second note for them, I think there's a chance for them to be even more dominant next year. Like, it's been covered. We don't have to do the whole thing about how they're so well positioned to potentially have a dynasty here. Like, we kind of already talked about it in terms of their team construction here. But, one of the things when you kind of heard like talking head, former players on TV talk about this Thunder team, every so often one of them would say something like, you know what, I'm not a believer in the Thunder. They're too young. And I always sort of thought that was sort of a former player hater type comment. Maybe because they didn't win or because they just, in their experience, you have to be old to win a championship or whatever it was. It's not to say that it wasn't without any credibility, but I think most of sort of like the NBA Twitter yachty kind of thing just sort of dismissed it as a hater comment. It turned out to be true, I think, a little bit at least. Obviously not totally true because they won the championship, but there were times in these playoffs where they looked really young, right? Game 6 against Denver in the second round, multiple times against these Pacers. But the difference, I think, between this young team and other young teams, right? You think about like the Boston Celtics, who were clearly too young to win it until they eventually did, but they kept getting close. this team actually grew in real time.
Yep.
I don't know that this Thunder team was ready to win the championship when the playoffs started, but they became ready to win the championship by the time it ended.
Agreed.
And that is a really cool thing to watch in real time. They went through the adversity, and whatever it is that they've developed, like the culture that Sam Presti and Mark Dagnall and Shai and all these guys have kind of have fostered here, whatever it was able to carry them through a really challenging, adverse postseason. That was more challenging than I think a lot of people expected. Maybe you want to take some credit away from Oklahoma, not you, but the general you takes credit away from OKC because it went 7 games. It is so hard to win a championship, and this team has never gotten even close to being this close, right? They had not gotten to the Western Conference Finals previous to this, and they grew up in real time and got to the point where they were ready to win a championship. And now there was a little bit of a fake it till you'll make it thing, and I don't even mean that as a pejorative. Like, it was, hey, like we are confident we can win the championship, but you never really know until you do it. And now they go into next year proof of concept, confident. Hey, we got the belt, we've got the trophy, we know we can do this, and that to me feels like a very dangerous team.
I think it's a huge thing to get over the hump, but I love because of the confidence it gives you, what you just said, but I love your point about them growing up in this playoffs. And I credit Alex Caruso more than anybody else because he had an amazing quote. And I actually, in the Nuggets series, Nuggets go up 3-1, or 2-1 in that series when they get the winning game 3. And I just remember Alex Caruso had a quote in there that made me think, OKC is going to actually end up coming back and winning this one. And he said, I told the guys that this series, because they had an easy first round, I told them that this series is going to bring out greatness in us, that this is what it takes to win a title and work down. And that's a great team. And they're good enough to push us to have to be our best self. And, collectively they had quotes like that where it was like, yes, they're viewing this through the exact lens that I think is important. They're not viewing it as, oh my God, we're down or any of that kind of stuff. This was the necessary pain we had to feel for us to be able, like, we're up 68 wins. They hadn't felt pressure in the regular season since December. So they were up by so much in the West that they didn't feel it. And it was like, yeah, but we have to feel it for us to become our best self. So this is like a gift that is going to require us to become what we are. And that's exactly what happened. And the Pacers did it as well. The Pacers forced that out of them, and they just were ready for the challenge. And to your point, they grew up in real time. And I agree. That makes them scarier going into next year, regardless of what happens to the roster in the offseason.